Hello, School Transportation Nation. Tony Corpin here. We're so glad you made it to the podcast. It's brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing, by IC Bus, the next generation can change everything, and by Propane, the energy for everyone. Mr. Ryan Gray, as usual, is joining me on the podcast, always bringing us great editorial insights. Thanks for joining us, Ryan.
Always a pleasure to be here, Tony, and School Transportation Nation.
That's right. And Ryan's going to be talking with Betsey Helfrich, who is the special education lawyer and upcoming TSD Conference keynote speaker. Betsey had a packed house last year for her TSD Conference keynote, all about the legal topics impacting special needs and school transportation. Always really important information, Ryan, that Betsey has for everybody, and everybody's all ears on this topics.
Absolutely. She's become our de facto Peggy Burns. Those of you who remember Peggy, Peggy still makes an appearance at our TSD conference from time to time. She was out there last year and facilitated a couple panels, but she really became the legal eagle for the school transportation industry for couple decades, from her time as in-house counsel at a Colorado school district to, of course, tenured faculty for TSD. So when she retired, certainly we were on the lookout for who would that next person be. And we definitely have a lot of legal experts out there that can come in and talk to this topic. But Betsey, we identified early on an LRP speaker. And she really has become that go-to person who is with us most years and really looking at transportation and lending her special education expertise to what this means for our audience. So looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah, and just to drop a reminder to you guys, if you haven't signed up yet for the TSD conference down in Frisco, Texas, November 7th through the 12th, our early bird registration discount ends on October 4th. That's $100 off your registration. If you go to tsdconference.com for details, you guys can register today. Make sure and take advantage of that $100 discount for you and your team. We'd love to have you there for the ultimate in special needs training. So don't miss it, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we have some great speakers for you, great networking, and it's going to be a real special event. Really, I think Ryan's done a bang-up job with our tenured faculty to lock down some of the best classes I think I've ever seen at the conference. 4 keynote speakers. We got a ride and drive event, technology demonstration, sold-out trade show. It is going to be a rockin' good time down in Texas, so be sure and join us. All right, Ryan, so we're going to hit the top headlines, but before we do, we got a quick message. Hey guys, what do software, hardware, and safety have in common? One word: TransFinder. At the STN Expo in Reno, TransFinder won 3 Innovation Choice Awards, voted on by STN Expo attendees for best software, best hardware, best safety technology. TransFinder's Route Finder plus routing solution and apps, Stop Finder and Wayfinder, are well known in the industry. Not everyone realizes TransFinder provides hardware like card readers, tablets, and mounts. And as for safety, Patrol Finder for schools is TransFinder's latest solution designed to make buses and campuses safer. TransFinder's president and CEO, Antonio Civitella, said the recognition means so much because it's voted on by STN Expo attendees. Civitella said, "We know a lot is riding on TransFinder because a lot is riding on those yellow buses that travel through our communities. TransFinder must continue to innovate as more is being expected of transportation departments from district leadership as well as parents." Learn more at transfinder.com. That's transfinder.com. All right, Ryan, we've got some really exciting announcements from the EPA.
Absolutely. So fiscal year 2024 Clean School Bus Program rebate was announced, $965 million. So essentially that third installment of $1 billion a year. So of course, the entire program is 5 years, $5 billion. So just past the halfway point.
It's our 4th round too. I think this is the 4th round.
It's the 4th round, but yeah, the third installment of the $3 billion or $1 billion a year, essentially. So at least 25 zero or low emission school buses per application, up to 50.
Ooh, that's nice.
So that application opened up on September 26th, so last Thursday, extends through January 9th at 4 p.m. Eastern. So that's the deadline to get in all those required supplemental forms, school district approval certification, school board awareness. That was something that EPA added last year when the first rounds went out. Some of the school boards weren't and school districts weren't aware that some of the OEMs and dealers were applying for them. So you got to get that certification and utility partner template. Again, looking at that priority that we've all come to know and love, must have 20% or more students living in poverty to get the most amount of money. Also, Title I school districts and charter schools, schools in the U.S. territories, schools identified with the rural code remote based upon the federal guidelines, Bureau of Indian Education funded schools, also school districts that receive basic support payments for children who live on Indian land. So if you meet any of those criteria, up to $325,000 plus charging infrastructure for Type D, or up to $245,000 plus infrastructure for Type A and Type C. If you don't meet that priority for electric school bus, it's up to $170K for Type D and $115K for Type A and Type C. Same thing with propane, Tony. Priority districts get up to $35,000 for a Type D or a Class 7, basically, vehicle, up to $30,000 for everything else. Non-priority, up to $25,000 for Type D, $20,000 for Type A and C. And last but not least, CNG priority is up to $45,000 for a Type D or $30,000 for everything else. Non-priority, $30,000 for Type D or $20,000 for Type A and Type C. But we know based on the stats that EPA has from their funding awards so far, about 98% of the awards are going to electric. So that's really the priority for EPA, is getting those zero emission vehicles out there. As with the past couple of rebates or competitive grants, the funding includes basically the behind the meter infrastructure. So the charging that's happening on the school district property. There is additional electric capacity now that's being funded. So we've seen that where some locations don't have the required electric capacity to add in the infrastructure. We've seen some creative solutions to that in the marketplace, but EPA is now funding that any additional electric capacity that's necessary, funding V2G, infrastructure, labor costs, workforce training again, consulting, delivery and warranties, and service level agreements. And once again, EPA is providing additional funding for each bus that has ADA compliance, so wheelchair lifts, essentially. So be on the lookout for that. We have a story at stonline.com, but certainly get it while it's hot, folks. Again, that deadline for application is January 9th.
Yeah, Ryan, these are exciting times for school transportation operators. There's definitely a lot of money to be had out there. And I know in talking to people too, the Inflation Reduction Act also provides tax credits that people could use in addition to this funding, right? Up to $40,000 to kind of close the gap between diesel and electric. So that's interesting. I also think interesting in that funding table, they're talking about Type D propane, which doesn't exist, but maybe there's some foreshadowing. Maybe we're going to see propane Type D in the future. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, and it could just be one of those things too, that they just, it's a table that they just, go down the list. And, but again, we're talking for the propane that are out there. Yes. Type C, but it's essentially only been about 2% of the, so far $2 billion or $3 billion that's been allocated. So again, the priority is going toward zero emissions, and certainly there is Type D electric school buses, and we hear more coming, or at least refreshes. We've seen the latest Type Ds in the market come from the likes of BYD or Ride and Green Power, and hearing from the likes of Bluebird that they have that new Type D electric plant that's underway down in Georgia. We're hearing similar things about Thomas Built buses. So certainly electric funding is on the menu, and like I said, get it while it's hot.
Yeah, it's really exciting, Ryan. I know many school transportation operators that we talked to out at STN Expo over the summer, they were pretty excited about the investment in electric. There is definitely a lot more movement as we see more buses hit the road, more electric vehicles started to kind of proliferate throughout the industry, and people are learning, right? I think we went from those early stages of how do I even consider adding 1, 2, 3 buses into my fleet. Now we're talking about scaling, right? If we're talking up to 50 buses in a single grant, that is the biggest one I think we've seen. 25 has been kind of the limit. And obviously there's also scrappage. That's been a big issue, right? Do I have older buses that I can scrap? And how long before, people start not having that scrappage to meet the test to get these funds. So, and we've also seen the table change a lot, right? There's been quite a reduction in the actual funding, where before it was much higher. And I think the argument obviously went with, we're not looking for a free bus, quote unquote. We're trying to help you fund the gap between diesel and electric, and you're supposed to be using your own funding as well. The government just isn't giving free buses out like Halloween candy, right? It's just one of those things that I think they've had to recalibrate the program. And obviously they're going to be able to stretch their dollars farther if they make the districts come up with a percentage of the money versus just giving it all away. But people might also decide, look, we just don't have the funding to even come up with that difference, so we're not going to do it. And we definitely hear that when people apply or don't apply for the money. I know when we survey our audience constantly, it's like, hey, are you going to apply for this Clean School Bus program? It's like 40% say yes, 20% say no, and the other percentage says maybe. Okay, well, what does maybe mean?
Yeah.
Like, are they thinking about it? Is that like what's holding them back from making that decision to move forward? And again, as electric gets out there, we see the stories. People may think, oh, it really doesn't work because we have a longer range. We need a bigger distance, and obviously battery technology is evolving quickly in terms of range. When this all started, now think about it, 3 or 4 years later, EV range is increased, and it's going to continue to increase. I know we had talked to Jason Yang over at Ride, and he said, yeah, we see double-digit increases in battery capacity year over year, and we've seen that in the transit industry, and that proves similar in school transportation as well. And I think as the battery technology evolves from companies like Ride, BYD, who is one of the largest battery manufacturers in the world, we're getting really good information from them on these sorts of things. So it's an interesting situation as we see districts invest in electric vehicles. And there's been pushback too. People say, I don't want electric, I want diesel, or I want propane, right? They're having to make choices out there. The funding definitely makes it more enticing, and the federal government clearly is favoring electric school buses as the favorite child in the funding mechanism here.
Absolutely. And again, those folks who want diesel, they got to look, where are they located? We've been talking about that the OEMs, the engine manufacturers, they have some very hard decisions that they're currently going through on where to allocate diesel, because we know that diesel engines are becoming more expensive with what EPA is doing with its GHG phase 3 rule. on the emissions that we'll start seeing those coming out here in the next 2 years. And what states, those dozen states that follow the California Air Resources Board advanced clean fleet regulation. We know that has been delayed with implementation because of issues from the engine manufacturers trying to meet the mandates of both CARB and EPA. And CARB has some stricter regulations than EPA does in some respects. So, there has been those delays, and we know that in those states, not that you can't operate diesel, but the incentive is for zero emissions. You can still operate propane in those states, but as we've seen, we have limited propane options now in the marketplace when it's just one manufacturer providing it. So, there are only so many engines to go around, and when you have a vastly larger trucking industry and, across all the classes, school bus can only get so many engines. And that's what the issue has been in that respect. So certainly there are a lot of decisions, a lot of forecasting to be done. And, looking at the funding levels again from what EPA is offering with this rebate and with the past rebates and competitive grants, certainly what the EPA told me a couple years ago was that, when it first rolled out, Clean School Bus program was looking to essentially pay for the cost of an electric bus or propane or CNG for that matter. And we've just been seeing the costs rise across the board. Of course, the Clean School Bus program came out right when the COVID-19 pandemic was sunsetting, if you will, and all the supply chain shortages that resulted from it or were exacerbated by it were really at the forefront and were really driving up prices. So shortly thereafter, EPA told me, he said, hey, we recognize that this funding cannot cover the full cost. So we're going to have to make it cover more the incremental cost. And really, like you said, Tony, getting school districts and school bus companies to get some skin into the game. And if you look at it, if you're one of those priority districts and you have a type C, you're getting up to $245,000 for it. That should cover, about what 80% or so, say, or 90% of the cost, maybe 2/3 of the cost, we'll say, maybe to be more conservative. But that leaves, say, and type C is around, through say 375 that seems to be a good ballpark for what the costs have been lately. So $135,000 out of pocket for the school district, to buy a diesel school bus, certainly a propane, it's going to run you that. So I think that's, again, what we're looking at is school districts have to buy buses. So what can you spend? What would you spend for a comparable type C diesel school bus? Would it be around 125, 135,000? Most likely, yes, especially with options. That's what we're looking at least. I'm hearing type C diesel school buses could be closer to 150, again, depending on options. So that's really what districts and school bus companies are looking for, trying to make those decisions of what do they need, what can they get in terms of grants. Remember, too, with the Clean School Bus program, you can also piggyback state grants on top of this. So let's not forget that. That's another element to this, as long as those state grants did not originate at the federal level. So certainly, here we are. We're basically, like we've been talking about, we're halfway through Clean School Bus program. So we'll see how the rest of the application period goes. Again, January 9th, 4 p.m. Eastern is when you all have time to get those applications into the EPA.
Yeah, 965 million reasons to apply, right? I definitely, it's an exciting thing, guys. I mean, we've been talking about this a lot, and it kind of probably feels like Groundhog Day, because every time these funding salvos come out, it's like, oh, there's another 965 million. Well, it never was like this before. So, we can thank our stars that this is funding for our industry, for you guys out there in the nation to get you cleaner, greener solutions into your fleet. If you choose to take advantage of it, great. As we've discussed, I'm not sure if we'll ever see this again, this kind of funding. It's probably a long shot, frankly. And to get this kind of legislation passed at these levels, it's really important, guys, to take advantage of these resources over the next couple of years, because it probably won't come around again. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll keep reporting to you every week here on The Nation, and we'll keep it going, right, Ryan?
That's absolutely. Always have that thumb on the pulse.
I know. Speaking of new things, we got a brand new October edition on the STN website, and we're going to talk about it in just a second. Ryan, we just got a press release from IC Bus about an exclusive webinar they're hosting on October 17th and October 18th. Do you guys operate school buses in a state adopting EPA, CARB, and GHG regulations in 2025? Join the IC Bus team for a detailed webinar to learn how these regulations will impact you and your operations in the coming years. Also discover how IC Bus's new bundled solutions can support your zero emissions journey. Guys, make sure and sign up. Again, that's Thursday, October 17th, 12 p.m. Central, and Friday, October 18th, 12 p.m. Central. You can register today by going to stnonline.com/go/IC webinars. That's stnonline.com/go/IC webinars. Guys, register today for the best webinar that meets the best date and time in your schedule. They can't wait to see you there. All right, Ryan, talk to me about your top stories in the October issue. What if I'm flipping open my October issue? What should I go to first? Is it your column? Is it Tony's column? I'm telling you, these are good stories.
Oh, well, we do our best. Certainly when you see October, the cover is going to grab you, I think. An upside down triangle. And I had to actually look this up to make sure, what does that mean? Hopefully we're not putting any subliminal messages up there, but it's good stuff. And it really matches our cover story for October on top transportation teams. Those of you who were out at STN Expo West in Reno, Nevada over in July, you may have taken in that lunch panel session with this year's top team transportation winners. TransFinder, our friends over there, have been sponsoring this survey over the last couple of years where school districts are open to nominate their transportation teams based upon the culture. So we've been seeing that culture tagline very frequently all throughout this latest school bus driver shortage dilemma across the nation, where school districts are really seeing a positive impact of culture. Certainly pay is always at the top of mind with school bus drivers, as well as transportation staff. Is not just looking at the school bus driver shortage, but looking at the entire department and their satisfaction. So TransFinder developed this survey, and based upon the responses, they score them. And so each year now, 2024 being the latest, they select the top scores and they recognize them at our STN Expo West. And we definitely have had articles on them. You're going to be hearing more interviews with these transportation teams. We had one recently with the first contractor, honorable mention, out there, Palmer Bus Service in Minnesota. They were on the podcast recently. I spoke with their executive team, and we have some more interviews lined up. But our very own editorial intern, Marari Acevedo, she has her inaugural article in the magazine this month, and she looks at that power of culture and communication, really tying into the message that our keynote in Reno, Christine Cashin, delivered, both to the full expo as well as to our transportation director summit. And looking at that necessary communication, that interdepartmental collaboration. So that's ties into that upside down pyramid that I mentioned at the top, where it's really flipping that traditional where where you have it, the base is at the bottom and going up to the pinpoint at the top. It's really flipping that on reverse, where you're looking at that employee culture and employee collaboration, employee decision making, really engaging your entire team to help drive the direction of your organization or your company. So that's what that article construes. And again, we have that great graphic that was developed by our very own Kimber Horn, our senior graphic designer. So definitely check that out. Other articles, certainly, here we are now that we're hitting October. Most school districts across the nation have been going at it now with the new school year for at least 2 months, or about 2 months, maybe a little less. So we're looking at some of those challenges, and there's a lot of them. Back to that driver shortage, that's what's driving a lot of them. Looking at Jefferson County, Kentucky, Jefferson County Public Schools last school year, of course, got some really negative headlines nationwide for implementing new AI-enabled routing. So checks in with them and just looks at some various issues going on around the nation. So that's a must see. Also with that, we have bell times and student ridership verification. So really looking more so at the from the routing standpoint. So definitely a lot of solutions that student transporters found at STN Expo West. And then, next month we have TSD Conference coming, Tony. And, when you have students with disabilities, that's a whole nother ballgame in terms of routing. So several really good articles. We look at replacing video and GPS. And of course, back to TSD, we have that TSD preview, because here we are, Tony, we're a month out.
Yeah, it's getting exciting, Ryan. I think we're coming down to the wire here with not a lot of time. Everybody's coming together for conferences. We're going to be out at the NAPT conference. Everybody's going to be visiting out there in Oklahoma City. Then a couple of weeks elapse, and then we're going to be out the TSD conference in Frisco. Another couple weeks elapse, and then it's Washington, D.C. for the NASDIPS meeting and conference. So a lot of people making the rounds. I'm not going to all of them, but definitely going to be at the NAPT and OKC and the TSD conference. I think you might be covering NASDIP, so we're definitely going to be busy here in October and November with a lot happening in the industry.
Absolutely, and all this happening too. It'd be remiss of me not to mention our Taylor Ekbatani, senior editor. About the time this episode is coming out, she may have a new addition to her family. So she's going to be out for the next several months on maternity leave as well. So all the best wishes to her and her family, and with that bundle of joy.
Yeah, we're really excited for Taylor, and I know she comes on as a guest host with us on occasion. So we'll get the lowdown once she's back from maternity leave on the happenings. Always great having new additions to the STN family as well, and really great stuff, Ryan. All right, well, we're going to get to a few more headlines. Quick break. Did you know that school buses fueled by propane can help you reduce emissions in your community while saving money? Propane school buses have a lower average carbon intensity than electric school buses over their lifetime by more than half. And they emit up to 96% less nitrogen oxide than diesel buses. All of this from fleets with the lowest total cost of ownership. It's no wonder propane is the most widely used alternative fuel in the school bus industry. Learn more at betterourbuses.com. That's betterourbuses.com. All right, we're back. So, Ryan, another article that jumped out at me in the October issue is this cell phone ban. I know it's really kind of gripping national media at a big level, and we're really looking at it and says, does this even impact school transportation in any way?
It does, or it does not. Yeah, it's one of those, again, one of those issues. It's all, the devil's in the details, right? And so definitely, you're living under a rock if you haven't been noticing all of the cell phones in schools articles and debate going on. California was the most recent to have a law go into effect. It was signed by Governor Gavin Newsom last week. That bill was passed actually end of August, beginning of September. Certainly, when we went to press with the article, we mentioned that possibility that it would be signed into law. Very real possibility, because there was a lot of support for that bill in California. It is the fifth state to pass a law requiring adoption of usage policies by school boards or school districts. Three other states, Florida leading the way there, they're the first one to pass it last year, was restrictions. So basically saying no cell phones by students in school or school sites or school property, which extends to the school bus, except when the students have an IEP, individualized education program, where they need to have their phone on them for whatever reason. We're seeing, various reasons. Students might have alarms for medication, or it might be a calming mechanism for them. Of course, being able to have immediate outreach to their parents, 911 for a medical emergency, those certain kind of aspects to that. But California is the latest now state to have that law that requires, again, the school districts to adopt a usage policy. And those school districts really will dictate, will this be, affecting the school bus. We reported in October that LA Unified, Los Angeles Unified School District, second largest school district in the nation, they passed their own policy over the summer. So they got out in front of any law taking effect. Now, this law in California goes into effect July 1st, 2026. So we're going to really see this for most school districts for the 26-27 school year. LA Unified actually goes into effect January 1st of 2025. So for the upcoming, second half of the school year, and then for next school year as well, and going forward. But they, LA Unified told us at that reporting going to press that they were still developing their policy. So we don't know yet what impact that will have on school buses. But Virginia, which is another state like California that has this usage policy that's required. Actually, they might be actually on the recommended, but we're seeing all these different states saying, "Hey, yes, we're passing a law to either restrict it outright, like a Florida or a South Carolina or Louisiana has done, or like California has done, that's requiring the school district or the school board to pass some kind of usage policy." We have other states that are passing resolutions or laws that are recommending school districts have those policies. That's the likes of Alabama, Connecticut, Oklahoma, and Washington. Then there's the states that are incentivizing pilot programs like Arkansas, Delaware, Pennsylvania. We reported last week, Arizona, in late August, they called for legislation. Their state school chief, Tom Horn, at the Arizona Department of Education. There was a bill actually that passed last year in Arizona that would have, or earlier this year, that would have banned cell phones, but that was vetoed by the governor. So certainly states all over the nation are looking at this. I was talking with a student transporter in Texas earlier, and he was telling me that, yeah, Texas is one of those states definitely looking at it. Right now, it's basically voluntary. School districts can still do whatever they want. But as we know, Tony, once a law is passed and either the best practice recommendation or requirement, that's when a lot of school districts will actually act on something. So certainly how this will impact school buses, we are seeing that in some cases it definitely is, other cases not so sure yet. So definitely all you folks out there in School Transportation Nation, be a part of the conversation. If transportation isn't being discussed when you're hearing about these laws or these regulations or a school board resolution in your own district, make sure transportation is a part of that discussion. Is transportation being addressed? In our reporting, certainly there are some parents that they want their kids to have the cell phone. They don't want it to be banned or taken away from them during the school day, because they want their kids to be able to reach out to them. So definitely a hot debate out there, and make sure that transportation is a part of that conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. It's about collaboration and communication. And these are really important things to take back to your team and to your administration and everybody involved, because these are integral things when you're building out that top team, that pyramid, right? And that triangle of that top team and all the things that make that up. So we're excited, guys, for everything happening here in this school year. There's a lot of fun things, new funding, new technology. The conferences are coming up. There's just so much going on. Some of the other things happening in the industry, guys, we've seen some other hot headlines. Last week, there was a hurricane blowing up towards Florida and Georgia. And I got on my phone as we were recording. It was just upgraded to a Category 3. So I can imagine there's been some school closures last week, Ryan. I guess we'll see next week what the aftermath is of the hurricane. Is it Helene? Is that or Helene?
Helene, yes, Hurricane Helene. So as we were recording this, it had not yet hit the panhandle of Florida, but certainly, there were already schools that had closed down on Thursday and Friday in anticipation. But yeah, certainly seeing high winds, a lot of rain, a lot of flooding. And this isn't just impacting the panhandle of Florida. Obviously, it's going to be moving up into Georgia. The eastern parts of South Carolina and North Carolina are going to be getting deluged. Tennessee is really going to be getting, once this thing it's going to be downgraded to a tropical storm once it hits land. But I mean, we're going to see a lot of weather extending as far northeast as Washington D.C. area, and I imagine even farther up into New York, up into the Midwest, as far west as Oklahoma. So folks, be careful out there, button down those hatches, keep the kids safe, keep your buses as dry as possible, and best of luck out there.
Great. All right, Ryan, we're going to jump over to the interview with Betsey Helfrich, Legal Eagle.
All righty, welcome back. Let's welcome back to the School Transportation Nation podcast stage, Betsey Helfrich.
Hi, everyone.
The Legal Eagle Special Education TSD Conference. Betsey, it's great to see you again.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to have you and talk some legalese. I believe this is going to be your fourth or fifth appearance at TSD Conference, November 10th. You have your legal hazards and bumps in the road that you provide, always packed. I mean, we're bringing in chairs. People are hanging from the rafters trying to hear what you're saying. I was mentioning to, I think it was on another earlier in the podcast with Tony, that you've really become our go-to person, our new Peggy Burns, if you will.
That is so nice.
Peggy blessed you. I introduced the two of you several years ago, I think after the first time you spoke with us, and she just thinks you're the bee's knees, and that goes a long way. So that's why we always tap you as a resource and hope you can come and spread your wisdom to our attendees. So again, you will be there back with us November 10th.
Yep.
Let's get into it. A lot going on from standpoint of legal implications, ramifications for students with special needs. You are a renowned special education attorney. You have your own law office, the law office of Betsey Helfrich, LLC, there in the St. Louis area of Missouri. What are the big things that you're tracking right now when it comes to special education law and especially implications on transportation as a related service?
Well, thanks, Ryan, for the kind introduction. And I cannot wait for TSD. It is, honestly, I speak all around the country, and it is one of my favorite places to present. I really genuinely love it because I think the participants are so friendly and engaged, and it's just a great conference that you run. So I'm looking forward to it. Something a little bit more of a downer that I'm dealing with in my law practice is, unfortunately, students with disabilities making school shooting threats. It's obviously, we've seen a big uptick since the shooting in Georgia on September 5th. And I think we're seeing some copycat type statements by students who really have no intention to cause harm a lot of the time. Unfortunately, we're seeing some where there's actual plans and motives. But a lot of times what you're seeing is students with disabilities who make a copycat type statement that they don't really understand, or they are not intending to cause harm, and they have no actual plan. And so superintendents and school administrators have no choice but to take that seriously, obviously, in light of everything going on. But my role as a special education attorney is helping schools through that process when it's a student IDEA or 504 eligible, and reminding them of the special rules that come into place when you're talking about discipline for students with disabilities. So just remember under the IDEA, if you're suspending a student for misconduct and they're protected by the IDEA, you're required to give them additional rights. And one of those is holding a manifestation determination meeting to say, hey, did this conduct occur because of their disability? So is this something they couldn't control, or they didn't understand the ramifications of their actions? So that does tie to the school bus. So even if it's a threat on the school bus, really anywhere on school premises, student with a disability, we still have to follow those extra IDEA rules. And sometimes I see schools recently saying, well, we did a threat assessment, so we don't have to give a manifestation determination meeting. You could always do a threat assessment. And a lot of schools have their own threat assessment protocol, and I think that's fantastic. But don't forget, a threat assessment doesn't replace doing a manifestation determination meeting. So anyone listening, just keep in mind there are all these extra rules for disciplining kids with disabilities, and that still applies even if they make a threat.
Well, I know that Peggy taught me well, and you have continued that, because I was going to add, when you were talking, I was going to interject that sounds like manifestation, or it could be.
Yep, it could be.
So certainly good things to keep in mind. What else? I know that you were telling me that OCR complaints are up. Federal investigations are up.
Right.
What are they looking at?
It's a great time to be alive, Ryan. It's just kind of sad. I feel really bad for school administrators. There's so much going on. There's so much pressure on them. In OCR, so the Office for Civil Rights, through the Department of Ed, they publish an annual report every year. And their annual report based on 2023 just came out not too long ago. And they published that they have seen the record number of complaints. In OCR history, they've taken a record number of complaints, up about 45% for resolutions with schools. The number one category they've been investigating is disability discrimination, and then followed by sex discrimination. And so OCR complaints just not going away anytime soon. Where I see that come back to transportation, honestly, is discrimination with regard to an equal opportunity to have transportation with regard to field trips. That is a big area of complaint that OCR investigates relating to the bus. Is, hey, my student didn't get to go on the field trip because they said we didn't have the transportation to get them there, or we didn't plan in advance, or we didn't have an aide on the bus to help keep them safe. And so keep that in mind, is that's a big area for litigation, is field trips, extracurriculars, and how our bus system is going to work for that.
Okay. I know you've mentioned field trips in past years, but really ramping up on that. Another issue, of course, that we're tracking very heavily, the ongoing driver shortage, school bus driver shortage. There's always been a school bus driver shortage in some way, shape, or form affecting this industry, but it's particularly bad ever since COVID-19.
Right.
And have seen it rear its ugly head with probably a lot of school districts nationwide, but specifically what's going on right now in Washington, D.C. They're no stranger, unfortunately, to bus service issues. They were under a federal decree several years ago, came out. Now they're kind of seemingly on the precipice. Same thing in Chicago.
Absolutely. And, I don't know if you followed St. Louis. We started a rough school year with transportation issues and lost our main transportation company. And it's really been a scramble. And so it does seem to be, there's a shortage, like you said, everywhere, but these big cities really seem to be struggling. That'd be interesting to kind of see some data on that, is shortage in big cities compared to more rural areas. But yes, speaking of DC, there was a federal complaint filed in March of this year, 2024, which we'll be talking about at TSD. It was a class action by students with disabilities and their parents saying, hey, we don't have the transportation we need in our IEP. And if it's in an IEP, as we always talk about at TSD, it's a contract. We put transportation in that IEP. We do have to provide it. And these parents in DC have filed a federal lawsuit saying we need relief here because we're not getting the services called for in our IEP with regard to transportation. And because of that, our students are suffering. So they're missing class time because buses are late. We're not getting them at all. So we're denying them FAPE, free and appropriate public education. Or they're saying, hey, because the bus ride is so long, by the time my student gets home, their health is suffering or they're missing their medication. And so it'll really be interesting to watch that case and see what happens. If it settles, if it goes to trial, I assume it'll eventually settle. But it's going to be really interesting to watch. And then Chicago as well. Some special education advocates there have filed another complaint. They've had a series of complaints kind of saying the same thing as DC. There's a shortage of bus drivers, but it's really impacting students with disabilities the most. And Chicago Public Schools has really been through the ringer with transportation and finding drivers. And I honestly don't know what the answer is as to how to find more drivers. Like, do you have the answer? I really don't know what schools are supposed to do.
Yeah, well, obviously pay is always comes to the forefront. But the folks that I'm talking to, in fact, coming up in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking with a couple of top transportation team award winners at our X-Teen Expo West in July.
Yeah.
And that was based upon a survey, basically employee satisfaction survey. And it was conducted by a third party, TransFinder, happens to be the sponsor of this podcast. And these employee surveys, they basically scored their own organization, and culture, the culture always comes back. It comes back to that. And to your point of, you're talking about, the large urban districts, they obviously, yes, on one hand, they have the bigger budgets, but more money, more problems, right? You have thousands of school buses. You need thousands of drivers. You're contracting out some of your operation. You have other in-house, or, a mix of the two. But these smaller districts where they perhaps have 30 buses, but they don't just need 30 drivers. They probably need 60 drivers because you want to have substitutes. They're better able to, with a mix of that pay, that's first and foremost, but having that culture. So we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting. I think we talked about this at TSD last year. A lot of Missouri schools have moved to the trend of a 4-day school week. And it's really catching on in even our biggest districts, not only just to handle transportation issues, but teacher shortages as well. And they're finding that to retain teachers, they're loving the 4-day school week. And so it's helping them retain high quality staff. So it's just kind of interesting. And then they're getting a lot of pushback from their citizens about that. But it's just an area I like to study because I don't know if that's the answer, but I'm seeing more and more schools really switch and kind of modify how they're learning.
Yeah, that's something that I've been tracking actually for TSD. And as of now, don't have a session for it this fall. But, who knows? Stay tuned, folks. That's what's great about being dynamic as STN is. You never know what you could find.
Right.
But something where we're talking about the 4-day week, because we've been looking at that for several years now. I know it's very popular out in Colorado and has been for a while.
Right. Okay.
But in terms of not only just the 4-day week, but looking at, year-round school, and the implications of that, or different programs that students need to go to, or the length of their day because of their disability, but the required programs they go to, they're trying to condense it into 4-day weeks instead of making the child go all 5. So there's all these different elements of that shortened week or that 4-day week,
right?
That it has a direct implication on transportation.
In virtual too. It'd be interesting for you guys to see.
Virtual. Yeah.
Virtual is really taking off, and since the pandemic, obviously, it's really the nature of virtual has changed. And how is that going to affect transportation? Is it really going to have an impact? What are the numbers? I assume virtual instruction will only continue to increase, but I just think that's a really interesting topic too, because the IDEA, those regulations were drafted so long ago, it really doesn't contemplate virtual instruction in any way. So it's hard to kind of figure out what the rules and parameters for virtual with regard to the IDEA.
Yeah. Well, I could see that from a standpoint of if a child is virtual instruction, but they still need to get to some kind of therapy.
Absolutely.
Or some kind of program they can't do virtual therapy. They still need to be transported. Then that's a really gray area where
we can't move a child's placement to virtual simply out of our own convenience, right? And I do see some schools try that of, you want to go to this private placement that's too far away. We don't have a route going there. So we're actually just going to put you virtual because we don't have the programming here. But it's really hard to change placement without parent consent to a virtual placement. But so transportation usually is not going to fly. The reason that we can't get them to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm. Another trend that Tony and I talked about earlier, cell phones. So we've been tracking that. We've had several stories on that, both in our current October issue as well as online.
Right.
Lots of states passing some variants of law.
Right. Right.
Florida was the first. Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana, they restrict cell phone use by students in classrooms or school property or some version of when a school employee has custody of that student. School buses,
right?
Except if the student's IEP calls for a cell phone. And then other states have either the recommendation that a policy be adopted or a requirement that school districts adopt a policy on usage and bans.
Right.
What are you seeing in terms of students with special education, how this is?
What's so interesting, it's interesting you said that. So of course, we can have a policy, we can have a blanket practice, but there's always exceptions for students with disabilities. So let's say a student does need their cell phone to monitor their blood sugar, right? They use the Dexcom app and they need it. That would be an exception we could make. Hey, kids don't have cell phones out unless the student needs it to make this, check their blood sugar. But what I'm kind of curious to see is in the future is if that's the rule, no cell phones unless you have an IEP, if more parents are going to be requesting IEPs 504 simply so their kid can have access to their cell phone so they can reach them. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that going to be the new trend? So teams have to be pretty strict of going back to parents making a request, but is this truly needed for FAPE? And if the answer is no, we don't have to make an exception for every student with a 504 IEP.
Wow. I feel like you were a part of my session planning conversations because one of our closing keynote actually on November 12th, Dana Rosen, who is a special educator, behavior expert. She's actually assistant director of transportation for Cypress Fairbanks ISD down in the Houston area. She's providing the closing keynote and essentially looking at creative solutions to IEP requests. And so read between the lines there. When can transportation say no?
Yes.
And when should they say no to these requests, whether they're coming from the parent or the IEP team is meeting, separate from transportation, not keeping them in the loop, or the superintendent's office is deciding, we're going to do this for this student.
And no is an important part of the process. And we're going to talk about that in my session at TSD too, of how to say no. It really matters. It's not, we can't afford that or we don't do that here. It's, hey, after hearing everybody's opinion and considering your request, that's not needed for FAPE. That's not needed to transport them safely to point A to point B. And there are some recent cases that we're also going to talk about at TSD, which I think are so interesting of what is the line. Do we have to come into a student's house and carry them over the threshold of their house into the bus? There was a case in New Jersey on that. And do we have to come extra early to accommodate parents' work schedule? Is that needed for FAPE? It's just those cases are so interesting. So we're going to talk about that at TSD of how do you determine, is this needed for FAPE or not? Or is this just a parent request based on their convenience or their work schedule? And there is a difference. And we really have to get back to, is this needed for FAPE? And if not, the answer can be no. And it is an important part of the process to say no, but in the right way.
Well, anyway, we've talked about that. New York City has they call them bus matrons, not monitors, because New York City has a lot of those older buildings, no elevators.
Yep.
And they have to walk up flights of stairs. And again, it comes back to the determination and under the whole tenet of IDEA is that we are giving these students and children instruction on and training on how to become a member of society later on when they age out, and they're able to do as much as they can for themselves and not coddling, for lack of a better term, and in fulfilling a request because it's what's best for the parent, or best for the school district for that matter. It's always about what's best for the kids, and it's
what's best for the kid and what's needed for FAPE right now. Not so someday they have perfect handwriting or someday they get to Harvard. It's right now. What do we need to do for this student? So you do have to really kind of keep the focus on that. That's interesting. Bus matrons, or I haven't heard that. So
yeah, that's what they call them in New York City, and it's probably similar to the New Jersey case. But
yeah,
last but not least, a little bit outside of the sandbox, but I think it's an important point to touch. The Supreme Court of the United States earlier this year made a lot of headlines with basically ruling that the so-called Chevron deference was unconstitutional. Essentially, something a legal case going back to the Reagan administration, where the Supreme Court at the time said, hey, when Congress passes a law and it's vague, that the federal agency that is in charge of implementing that regulation or that law or that rule can then color in the blanks, basically.
Right.
We talked a little bit about that in terms of regulations, and not necessarily looking at IDEA or the Department of Education, but looking at some other regulations. Certainly when it comes down to EPA, there's a lot of stuff going on right now with, the environment and whatnot. But you've been tracking that as well.
Yeah.
Tell us what you've been looking at or what you've been hearing of late.
It's interesting. And the case itself was about wildlife and fisheries and hatcheries, not really anything related to education or transportation, but it will trickle down to all federal agencies and how courts interpret statutes and really not giving that level of deference anymore to the controlling agency. So it's not going to rock our everyday world in the IDEA or transportation world, at least from the special ed perspective and implementation of IEPs. But it will be interesting to watch future litigation about the regulations, IDEA, and how we interpret them and how courts make decisions going forward. Or maybe when we do finally get new IDEA regs, will it change the nature and length of the regs? It'll be kind of interesting to watch. And you don't really get a ton of Supreme Court cases that really impact education that often. Maybe once every year there's a big one, or every couple of years. So it's one we'll talk about at TSD and just kind of keep an eye on. But it's one of those things that'll take some litigation to really have some sort of impact to see how it'll impact things going forward.
Awesome. Well, that's why the nation tunes into this podcast, the magazines, and our conferences like TSD to hear experts like Betsey and to connect those dots, those nuances. And, it's, yes, so much is the day-to-day operation, but as much as we can do to fill in those blanks and connect what's going on out there in the larger world and how it could impact transportation, things that you need to know. So,
right. That's why your conference is so good, because there's not a lot out there for transportation directors, really just in the world of special education and special education law. And every time I leave your conference, people are so grateful to hear, or just even the basics of IDEA and 504, because a lot of time that's, they're not included in those trainings. So I just think that's why people like your conference so much.
Well, I think they also like it because of people like you, Betsey. So finding those experts in there to fill in the blanks for them, and they walk away learning something new. And it's always my goal is if someone who's been in this industry for 20 years or 30 years and they walk away and say, I didn't know that, and we have this issue and I've been befuddled and I have the answer. At least I have a pathway of knowing where to go to try to solve it. So looking forward to it, Betsey. It's always a pleasure. Before we know it, it's just a little over a month.
Gonna fly.
So it goes by too fast. All this work that goes into it, and then it just goes away. But, I am looking forward to it. It's energized me. I can tell how excited you are. Yeah. I'm equally excited. And I hope fully out there, everyone in the nation who's attending, I hope you're excited. And if you haven't registered yet, hey, this is even more reason to do so. So
definitely. See you guys there.
All right, Betsey, take it easy. See you soon.
Guys, bye.
Thank you.
A special thanks to Betsey for coming on and also being our TSD keynote speaker. We can't wait to see you down in Frisco, November 7th through the 12th. You guys make sure and sign up for TSD Conference. Special thanks to Ryan Gray for jumping on, sharing his knowledge about everything happening in the school transportation industry. We also appreciate our sponsors, TransFinder, IC Bus, and Propane for being sponsors of this episode. We greatly appreciate you guys. Make sure and check out all our sponsors. Go to the website. If you email them, let them know you heard about them on the STN podcast, School Transportation Nation. We're always here for you guys every week, talking about latest headlines, bringing you great interviews, great discussions about everything happening in school transportation. Guys, if you want to listen to this podcast, make sure you go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. Get it out to your friends, get it out to your colleagues. Make sure you build that top transportation team by sharing this podcast with everyone in your network, because that's how we get better. We share, guys. We get together. We collaborate. So, Nation, we appreciate you. Make sure and check out that October issue. Check it out, stnonline.com. Go click on it. Let us know what you think. Write a letter to the editor. Ryan and I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to read Mirari's article as well. It's her first time. So, Ryan, thanks for giving her a shout out on that. We appreciate her. And thanks to the whole editorial team for great content this month. Nation, we'll see you next week. We love you.